All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at a pretty wild and honestly kind of disturbing idea. What if all of human conflict, all our wars, what if it's not about greed or power or ideology? What if it's all rooted in a deep, ancient trauma? Let's explore that.
So the source material for this kicks off with this really powerful quote, and it makes you think, right? Lions, sharks, you name it. They're predators, for sure. But they kill to eat. Humanity, though? Our capacity for cruelty seems to be on a whole other level. So the big question is, why? What makes us so different, so uniquely brutal?
Well, the answer, according to the source, starts by looking at humanity in a totally new way. It asks us to stop seeing ourselves as just a collection of individuals, and instead to see us as a single, collective war machine.
Yeah, they call it the War Machine Collective. The idea is that we aren't just a species that sometimes goes to war. We are the war machine. That conflict, and specifically the complete annihilation of our enemies, is baked right into our DNA. It's our programming. But where on earth would a code like that even come from?
This is where it gets really fascinating. The psychological root of this instinct, well, it doesn't come from a place of strength or dominance. It comes from a place of absolute, profound terror.
So you can just forget that classic image of the big, tough caveman at the top of the food chain. For most of our evolutionary history, that wasn't us. We were small, we were weak, we were basically on the menu for every giant predator out there. We weren't the hunters, we were the prey. And an experience that long, that terrifying, it leaves a deep collective scar.
And this slide just breaks down that difference perfectly. A predator, its motivation is hunger. Simple. It hunts when it needs to. But for early humans, the motivation was a constant, gnawing fear of being ripped to shreds. So our goal wasn't just to find food. It was to eliminate the source of that terror permanently. We weren't killing to eat, we were killing to try and overcome this trauma.
So, and this is the absolute key, the conclusion we drew after millions of years of being hunted wasn't just, hey, we should probably defend ourselves. No, it was, to survive, we have to utterly and completely annihilate any potential threat. It's an instinct for total extermination, born from this deep-seated terror of being wiped out ourselves.
For thousands of years, this instinct was basically the engine driving human history, fueling bigger and more brutal wars. But then, in the 20th century, something completely new happened. Something that forced our inner war machine to actually learn a new trick.
We finally did it. We created the ultimate weapon of annihilation. The source calls it the absolute ring, a tool so powerful it could finally let us act on our species' darkest impulse. But here's the massive paradox. The very weapon that could destroy absolutely everyone forced us to stop and think for the first time in history, because suddenly total war was impossible to win.
And you can just see on this timeline how incredibly fast everything shifted. We go from the absolute peak of annihilation warfare in the World Wars to the creation of the bomb in '45. And then, just a few short years later, the Korean War becomes the first big test case for this new world. You have two superpowers, both with these absolute weapons, and they have to figure out how to fight without literally ending the world. The result was something humanity had never really tried before.
And that brand new path is symbolized by this number, 155 miles. That's the length of the Korean demilitarized zone, the armistice line they drew in 1953. Think about it. It was the first concrete, physical proof that two enemies who wanted to destroy each other could instead choose a stalemate. They could choose coexistence over mutual annihilation. It was the first real crack in our ancient programming.
So this really critical lesson, learned on a small peninsula in Asia, was about to be scaled up to a global level. It was the beginning of what the source calls the long truce.
You know, we call it the Cold War, but looking at it through this lens, it's something different. It wasn't really a war. It was history's longest and most stressful truce. It was this 40-year period where the entire planet basically held its breath, and humanity's ancient instinct to just annihilate its enemies was held in a very, very fragile check by this new, terrifying logic of coexistence.
So how did this incredibly tense truce finally come to an end? Well, the source points to a kind of dual strategy from the 80s. Step one was just immense military and economic pressure, things like Reagan's Star Wars program, SDI, that pushed the Soviet system to its absolute breaking point. But, and this is so crucial, that was paired with step two, an off-ramp. Things like arms reduction treaties offered a way out, a path to a peaceful end.
It was this perfect mix of threat and diplomacy. Which, of course, brings us to today. The long truce ended, we had a period of relative peace, but now we're at another one of those huge historical turning points, and you can almost feel those old ghosts starting to stir again.
In the same way the nuclear bomb was a singularity that changed all the rules, the rise of AI is another one. It's a moment that is fundamentally rewriting how our world works, and yeah, it has incredible potential, but it also carries incredible danger.
The argument from the source is that as new global conflicts start to flare up, we're not just reacting to what's happening now. We're tapping back into that deep, ancient trauma of the prey. Our fear is being reawakened, and it's pushing us away from that hard-won lesson of coexistence and back towards our old default setting, annihilation.
And so we're left with this pretty unsettling question. We had this brief, fragile, less than a century-long experiment with coexistence. Are we about to throw that all away and let our oldest, darkest instinct take the wheel again? The technology is new, but the trauma is ancient. And that is definitely something worth thinking about.